The ground beneath our feet is not as solid as it seems. Entire cities have been erased from history, not by invaders or disease, but by the mountains themselves. We are about to perform a geological autopsy, dissecting these catastrophic events to uncover how and why they happened. By the end, you will understand the hidden forces that have dictated the rise and fall of societies for millennia. What does the fate of a civilization swallowed by the earth tell us about our own future? How can a single night of geological violence rewrite history? The answers lie buried in stone, waiting to be read. What do you believe is the greatest threat the natural world holds for modern civilization? Mountains breathe. They shift and settle over millennia, their immense weight a constant negotiation with the forces deep within the planet. To understand how they can erase a civilization in a single, violent episode, we must first redefine our idea of a mountain. It is not a permanent monument, it is a dynamic, living system, and a geological autopsy is our method of reading its life story after a catastrophic failure. Think of it as forensic science on a planetary scale. Just as a pathologist examines tissue to determine a cause of death, geologists analyze rock layers, sediment deposits, and fractures in the earth to diagnose the precise sequence of events that led to a collapse. This meticulous dissection reveals the hidden weaknesses, the triggers, and the final, devastating moments. So, what exactly qualifies as a civilization-swallowing event? It is not a slow decline from climate change or soil erosion, though those can play a part. It is a sudden, catastrophic geological violence. It is the ground literally opening up or a mountainside detaching and flowing downhill at incredible speeds, burying everything in its path under hundreds of feet of rock and debris. The event is so swift and so total that it freezes a moment in time, preserving a complete cross-section of a society exactly as it was in its final instant. This foundational understanding of the process, of the mountain as an active agent of change, is what allows us to appreciate the sheer scale and terror of the disasters we are about to investigate. It sets the stage for our first deep dive into a site where legend and geology collide, where an entire city was lost for centuries beneath a mountain's wrath. On a winter night in 373 BC, the powerful Greek city of Helike simply vanished. One moment it was a thriving maritime power, the next it was gone, swallowed by the sea. Ancient writers told of a devastating earthquake, a colossal wave, and the city sinking into the depths as an act of divine punishment from the god Poseidon. For over 2,000 years, the story of Helike was dismissed as legend, a moral fable about angering the gods, but the earth kept its own records. Modern geological surveys revealed the city was built directly on top of a major fault line. The legend of Poseidon's wrath was a dramatic interpretation of a terrifyingly real geological event. A powerful earthquake would have liquefied the soft, waterlogged ground beneath the city, causing it to collapse in on itself. Simultaneously, the quake likely triggered a massive underwater landslide on the nearby seabed, which displaced an enormous volume of water and sent a tsunami crashing back over the ruins. The city was hit with a 1-2 punch from below and from the sea, then buried under layers of silt, completely erased from the landscape. This discovery is a profound lesson in how human memory works. When a disaster is too catastrophic to comprehend, we wrap it in story. The unpredictable violence of plate tectonics became the will of an angry god. The geological autopsy of Helike peels back that myth to reveal the stark physical processes at work, showing us that the truth written in the strata is often more dramatic than the legend. Yet the destruction of a single city, however complete, represents only one scale of catastrophe. The mountains are capable of something far more vast, an event that can wipe an entire civilization from the map and reshape the geography of a region for centuries. The fate of Helike was a local tragedy, but the mountains can orchestrate disasters on a truly civilizational scale. Around the year 1177 BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean world, a glittering network of empires and kingdoms, shattered. The great palaces of the Mycenaeans in Greece were burned and abandoned. The Hittite Empire in Anatolia vanished from history. Even Egypt, a bastion of stability, barely survived, its records speaking of mysterious invaders they called the Sea Peoples. For centuries, historians pointed to these marauders as the sole cause of the late Bronze Age collapse. But a geological autopsy reveals a far more complex and terrifying picture. The true enemy was not just a fleet of ships, but the very climate itself. Evidence locked in tree rings from ancient forests and in ice cores drilled from deep within glaciers tells a story of severe, prolonged drought. This was not just a few bad harvests. It was a climatic shift that lasted for decades, perhaps even centuries. Imagine the entire food production system of the ancient world, already operating on a razor's edge, suddenly failing year after year after year. Famine would have spread like a plague. This desperation is the missing piece that explains the mass migrations. The so-called Sea Peoples were likely not a unified army of destruction, but a wave of climate refugees, displaced from their own homelands by starvation, pushed onto the seas in a desperate search for survival. They were as much a symptom of the collapse as its cause. This was a systemic failure. The intricate trade routes that supplied empires with tin for bronze and luxury goods seized up. Kingdoms that relied on centralized grain storage saw their reserves evaporate. Social order crumbled under the weight of hunger and fear. The collapse was not a single event, like an earthquake or a landslide, but a cascade of interconnected breakdowns, all triggered or severely worsened by that one underlying geological and climatic reality. It proves that even the mightiest empires, with their towering walls and vast armies, are ultimately vulnerable to the slow, inexorable pressures exerted by a changing planet. This concept of systemic vulnerability brings us to a different kind of mountain, one that does not shake or slide, but simply holds its breath until the moment it decides to exhale. The Minoan civilization did not face a slow starvation, but a single, earth-shattering detonation. Their world ended not with a whimper, but with a bang heard across the ancient world. The island of Thura, a vibrant hub of Minoan culture and a crucial port in their maritime empire, was not an island at all. It was a massive volcano. Around the year 1600 BC, that volcano awoke. The eruption of Thura is considered one of the most violent volcanic events in the last 10,000 years. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. The central part of the island where the volcano stood literally collapsed into the emptied magma chamber below, creating the vast caldera that defines Santorini today. But the geological violence did not stop there. The collapse of the volcano into the sea triggered tsunamis of unimaginable power. These were not ordinary waves. They were walls of water, perhaps hundreds of feet high, that radiated outward across the Aegean Sea at the speed of a jet aircraft. Within an hour, they would have slammed into the northern coast of Crete, the Minoan heartland just 70 miles away. The Minoans were a seafaring people. Their power, their wealth, their very identity was tied to the sea. In one horrific morning, the sea they commanded turned against them. Their great coastal palaces, their bustling ports, and their entire fleet of ships would have been utterly obliterated. The tsunamis scoured the coastline, sweeping entire settlements out to sea. Yet the devastation was only beginning. The eruption pumped billions of tons of volcanic ash and pumice into the atmosphere. This ash cloud would have blotted out the sun for days, creating a false night and plunging the region into darkness. Then the ash began to fall. It fell like gray snow, a silent, suffocating blanket that smothered everything. On Thura itself, the town of Akrotiri was buried instantly, preserved in ash just as Pompeii would be centuries later. On Crete, the ashfall was less total but far more insidious. It poisoned the soil, making it infertile. It choked the crops, causing widespread famine. The Minoan civilization, whose economy relied on trade and agriculture, was hit with a knockout blow. Their navy was destroyed. Their ports were ruined. Their fields were rendered barren. They could no longer feed their people or maintain their trade routes across the Mediterranean. While the Minoan people and their culture did not disappear overnight, their power was broken forever. They became vulnerable, and within a generation or two, they were likely absorbed or conquered by their rivals, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. The eruption of Thura demonstrates a terrifying geological truth. A single point of failure, one mountain's catastrophic decision to exhale, can unravel an entire civilization in a matter of hours. It is the ultimate example of a fast collapse, a stark contrast to the slow grinding pressures that toppled the Bronze Age empires. Yet that slow, tectonic force has its own unique and terrifying signature, one that can fold the very skin of the planet and bury cities not in ash but in stone. The Minoan world ended in fire and water, but some mountains trade in slow, crushing pressure. The Himalayas are a collision in progress, a battle between continents that is still being fought. The Indian subcontinent is plowing relentlessly into Asia, and the result is the greatest mountain range on Earth, a wall of rock that is still rising. This ongoing tectonic upheaval is not a historical event. It is the present reality, and it has dictated the fate of Asian civilizations for millennia. The first and most profound influence is on the climate itself. As the warm, moist air from the Indian Ocean moves north, it has nowhere to go but up the sheer face of the Himalayas. The air cools as it rises, squeezing out its moisture in the form of torrential rain. This is the engine of the monsoon, the lifeblood of the Indian subcontinent. Without this colossal mountain barrier, much of South Asia would be a desert. The Himalayas, therefore, are not just mountains, they are a vast geological irrigation system. But this gift of water comes with a terrible price. The same tectonic forces that lift the peaks also build up immense strain along the fault lines that run the length of the range. This strain is released without warning in the form of catastrophic earthquakes. The historical record is littered with the ruins of cities shattered by these events. Entire capitals have been leveled, their populations lost, their political power broken in a single, violent shudder of the earth. These seismic disasters have repeatedly altered the course of history, toppling dynasties and forcing mass migrations. Beyond the immediate destruction, the Himalayas have also acted as history's ultimate gatekeeper. This towering wall of rock and ice funnels all movement. It determined where empires could expand, where trade routes could be carved, and where cultures could meet. The legendary Silk Road was not a matter of choice, it was a geological necessity. Travelers and merchants were forced north, skirting the impassable peaks through Central Asian deserts and mountain passes. This routing dictated which ideas, which technologies, and which religions flowed between East and West for centuries. The very identity of Asia was sculpted by this immense barrier. The slow-motion collision that built the Himalayas is a force of both creation and destruction, nurturing civilizations with one hand while threatening to erase them with the other. Yet the mountains possess another, more localized weapon, one that moves with terrifying speed, transforming solid ground into a river of death. The year 1911 revealed the raw power of a single mountainside to rewrite a map overnight. In the remote Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan, a massive earthquake shook the land loose, triggering the Usoi Landslide, one of the largest in recorded history. An estimated 2 billion cubic meters of rock tore free from the mountain face. That number is almost impossible to grasp. Picture a solid block of rock and earth so immense it could bury a major modern city under hundreds of feet of debris. This colossal wall of material did not just tumble down, it flowed across the valley of the Murghab River, moving with such force and volume that it completely blocked the waterway. In moments, the village of Usoi was erased, buried without a trace beneath the mountain that had stood above it for millennia. But the mountain's work was not finished. The river, now blocked, began to pool behind this new natural dam. Slowly at first, then with gathering inevitability, it filled the valley, creating what is now known as Lake Serez. This was not a peaceful new lake, it was a ticking clock. The dam itself, a chaotic pile of rock over half a kilometer high, is the tallest natural dam in the world. For decades, the lake grew, its deep blue waters hiding a terrifying potential. What if the dam failed? A catastrophic breach would unleash a wall of water downstream, wiping out every community in its path. The creation of Lake Serez transformed the Usoi landslide from a local tragedy into a persistent regional threat, a sword of Damocles hanging over thousands of lives for generations. This modern event is a perfect, chilling analog for the ancient disasters we have been exploring. It proves that the geological processes capable of swallowing civilizations are not relics of a distant past. They are ongoing, a fundamental part of how our dynamic planet operates. The Usoi event was swift and terrifyingly visible. Yet sometimes, the mountains do not need to fall in a single, catastrophic roar. They can achieve the same end with a slow, silent, and insidious form of consumption. A mountain does not always need to fall to destroy a civilization. Sometimes it simply bleeds to death. The most vital resource any society possesses is not gold or armies, but a thin, precious layer of fertile topsoil. In the slow, relentless dance of wind and water, this lifeblood of empires can be stripped away grain by grain until nothing remains but barren rock. This is a geological autopsy of a different kind, one that examines a corpse that took centuries to die. The Roman Empire provides the textbook example. Their vast population and legendary legions were fed by the fertile slopes of the Apennine Mountains, but to fuel their expansion, they cleared the forests that anchored that soil. They plowed the hillsides too intensively, season after season. With every rainfall, the exposed earth was carried away. This was not a dramatic event, just a quiet, constant loss. The consequences, however, were anything but quiet. All that eroded soil had to go somewhere. It washed downstream, silting up the very rivers that served as commercial arteries. The port of Ostia, Rome's gateway to the sea, gradually filled with mud, becoming a stagnant marshland. The empire's economic veins were slowly clogged. More critically, the farmland on the mountains themselves lost its productivity. Yields declined. Feeding the sprawling population of Rome became an ever more expensive and difficult logistical nightmare, forcing a greater reliance on imported grain from distant, vulnerable provinces. The empire did not collapse in a single day from soil erosion, but this creeping degradation systematically weakened its economic foundation. making it less resilient to other shocks, from barbarian invasions to political corruption. The mountains did not swallow Rome in a single gulp. They starved it out over centuries by withdrawing the most fundamental support any civilization requires: fertile ground. This form of collapse is perhaps the most insidious because it is so easy to ignore until it is too late. It stands in stark contrast to the raw, instantaneous power we must now confront, a force that can reshape a continent in minutes. The Roman Empire starved slowly, but the cities at the foot of Mount Vesuvius died in an instant. When the mountain erupted in the year 79, it did not just bury Pompeii and Herculaneum, it performed a perfect, horrifying preservation. The initial phase of the eruption was a rain of pumice stone and ash, a heavy grey fall that drove people to seek shelter in their homes, hoping to wait out the storm. But the mountain had saved its deadliest weapon for last. This was not mere ash fall. It was a pyroclastic flow. Imagine a dense, searing avalanche of superheated gas, ash, and rock racing down the mountain slopes at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. This is not lava, it is something far more deadly, a fluidized cloud with the density of concrete and the temperature of a blast furnace, instantly vaporizing everything in its path. The first surge hit Herculaneum, which was closer to the volcano. The intense heat was so extreme it vaporized human flesh and boiled brain matter inside skulls. It carbonized wooden structures, turning them to coal in a flash, and simultaneously sealed the entire town under a thick, hardening layer of volcanic material. When the flows reached Pompeii a short time later, the effects were equally lethal but slightly different. The searing gases suffocated people where they stood, and the subsequent burial under many feet of ash and rock created a perfect mold of their final moments. Over centuries, the soft organic material of the bodies decayed, leaving hollow cavities in the hardened ash. Archaeologists learned to pour plaster into these voids, revealing the heartbreaking casts of the victims, frozen in their last postures of terror and despair. This is the geological autopsy in its most literal form. The stratified layers of volcanic deposit tell the precise timeline of the eruption, hour by hour. The positions of the bodies reveal exactly what people were doing when the first surge hit. A baker was found near his oven, a family huddled together in a basement, a guard at his post. The event was so swift and so total that it captured a full cross-section of Roman life, preserving not just the grand villas and forums, but the loaves of bread in the ovens, the jars of wine, the political graffiti on the walls. This instantaneous preservation offers a window into the past of unparalleled clarity, a moment of everyday life frozen by geological violence. The fire from below is one danger, but the ice from above can be just as formidable. Mountains of ice hold the future of civilizations in their frozen grip. Glaciers are not static sheets of ice. They are colossal, slow-moving rivers that carve the very bones of the mountains they rest upon. Their immense power lies not just in their physical presence, but in their role as the planet's most vital water towers. During the Great Ice Ages, when these rivers of ice advanced, they rendered entire high-altitude regions completely uninhabitable, pushing human populations into refuges at lower elevations. But when the climate warmed and the glaciers began their long, slow retreat, they unleashed a gift that would change the world. The steady, predictable meltwater from these shrinking ice giants fed the great rivers of antiquity. It was this reliable water source flowing from the high mountains that allowed for the emergence of agriculture in the arid plains of Mesopotamia, along the Indus River, and in the high valleys of the Peruvian Andes. The first cities were born from this glacial bounty, yet this relationship is a fragile pact. The same ice that gives life can also take it away with terrifying speed. Today, as our climate warms at an unprecedented rate, we are witnessing a new and dangerous phase of this ancient cycle. Glaciers are not just retreating slowly, they are collapsing. As they pull back, they often leave behind massive lakes of meltwater, dammed precariously by unstable piles of glacial debris known as moraines. These are ticking time bombs. An earthquake, a block of ice calving into the lake, or simply the pressure of the water itself can cause the moraine dam to fail catastrophically. When it does, it unleashes a glacial lake outburst flood, a devastating wall of water, ice, and rock that roars down mountain valleys with unimaginable force. These floods can wipe out villages, roads, and power plants in minutes, leaving a trail of destruction for hundreds of miles. The very water that once nurtured the cradles of civilization is now becoming an agent of its potential destruction downstream. This delicate dance with the ice reveals a profound truth. The mountains do not just threaten us with falling rock or shaking ground. They control the most fundamental resource of all, water, and they can deliver it as a life-giving river or a death-dealing flood. This elemental power of water, when unleashed on a landscape stripped bare, can transform a mountain into a weapon of its own making. The power of water to carve continents is written in the stone of eastern Washington. There, a vast, scarred landscape of deep canyons and dry waterfalls stands as a monument to a single, catastrophic weekend near the end of the last ice age. A towering ice dam over half a mile high had formed in the mountains of what is now Montana, trapping a colossal body of meltwater known as Glacial Lake Missoula. This was not a mere lake, it was an inland sea holding more water than Lake Ontario and Lake Erie combined. Then the dam failed. The ice wall shattered, unleashing a wall of water hundreds of feet high that raced across the land at 60 miles per hour. This was not a flood, it was a megaflood. The entire volume of the lake, enough to cover the states of Washington and Oregon to a depth of 10 feet, drained in just a few days. The water did not flow, it scoured. It ripped the topsoil from the underlying basalt rock, plucked house-sized boulders from the ground, and carved immense channels and potholes directly into the bedrock. It created dry waterfalls 5 times wider than Niagara, where the water simply leaped over entire cliffs in its furious rush to the sea. The Channeled Scablands were born in a geological instant, a landscape of wounds that remains starkly visible from space today. This event occurred before complex civilizations could arise in its path, but its message is chillingly clear. Any human presence in that torrent's way would have been erased so completely that not a single tool or bone would remain to tell the story. The Scablands are a testament to the Earth's plumbing system rupturing, a demonstration of how the sudden release of water from a mountainous region can perform continental-scale surgery in a matter of hours. Yet for all the destructive power of water, the Earth possesses a final, more subtle weapon, one that does not rush or roar, but simply swallows from below. The ground can vanish without a tremor, without a sound. While a volcano announces its fury with fire and ash, another kind of mountain swallows in perfect silence. Deep beneath the surface of certain landscapes, a slow chemical feast is taking place. Rainwater, slightly acidic from absorbing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, seeps down through the soil. When it encounters bedrock made of soluble limestone, gypsum, or dolomite, it begins to dissolve it molecule by molecule. Over centuries, this process carves out a hidden world of caverns, tunnels, and underground rivers. This is a karst landscape, and its surface is a fragile lid over an increasingly hollowed-out foundation. The most dramatic manifestation of this hidden erosion is the sinkhole, a sudden collapse that can swallow a house, a road, or an entire city block into the earth. These are not random acts of God, but the inevitable conclusion of a geological process that has been working in the dark for millennia. The ancient Maya of the Yucatan Peninsula lived intimately with this duality. Their entire civilization was built upon a vast limestone platform. The region has no surface rivers or lakes. All their freshwater came from natural wells known as cenotes, which are nothing more than sinkholes that have collapsed down to the water table. These cenotes were sacred portals to the underworld and the sole source of life in a dense jungle. The Maya relied on them utterly, yet the very same geological process that gifted them these water sources was also systematically weakening the ground beneath their great cities. The limestone that underpinned their towering pyramids and sprawling plazas was being silently dissolved away by the same water they depended on. This created a hidden vulnerability, a network of voids and weaknesses that could lead to sudden, catastrophic subsidence. A heavy rainstorm could be the final trigger, washing soil into an underground cavity until the roof could no longer support its own weight. The collapse would be instantaneous. This is a slow-motion swallowing that can accelerate without warning, a stark contrast to the explosive violence of a caldera. It is a reminder that the Earth does not always need to shake or explode to become a threat. Sometimes it simply decides to stop holding you up. A caldera collapse is a geological event that redefines catastrophe. It begins when a volcano's subterranean magma chamber, having expelled its contents in a colossal eruption, can no longer support the immense weight of the mountain above. The entire volcanic structure then implodes, creating a vast, bowl-shaped depression that can be dozens of miles across. The eruption that triggers this is not a localized disaster, it is a planetary event. Around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano in Indonesia experienced such a collapse. The scale of its eruption is almost beyond human comprehension. It spewed an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of volcanic material into the atmosphere. To put that in perspective, that is enough ash to bury the entire state of California to a depth of nearly 10 feet. This dense cloud of sulfate aerosols encircled the globe, reflecting sunlight back into space and plunging the planet into a volcanic winter that may have lasted for a decade. Global temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis ground to a halt, ecosystems collapsed. Genetic evidence suggests the human population was reduced to perhaps just a few thousand breeding pairs, teetering on the very edge of extinction. This was not a mountain swallowing a civilization. It was a mountain threatening to swallow the entire human species. No complex society in recorded history has endured a super eruption, but the geological record is clear that they are a recurring feature of our planet's life. The Yellowstone caldera in the United States is the remnant of 3 such cataclysmic events in the last 2 million years. Its subterranean heat still powers the famous geysers and hot springs, a visible reminder of the titanic forces slumbering below. A future eruption there would not be a local lava flow. It would be a global climatic shock, disrupting agriculture and supply chains worldwide for years, potentially leading to a collapse of the modern globalized order. The threat of a caldera collapse forces us to confront the ultimate geological audit, one that asks not which city will fall, but whether our entire technological civilization possesses the resilience to survive a planet's violent rebuke. To answer that, we must become fluent in the language the mountains themselves speak, a tongue written in layers of rock and hidden faults. The evidence is locked in the stone itself, a silent witness to ancient violence. To decipher these messages, geologists perform a form of time travel, using a set of specialized tools that act as their scalpel and microscope. The first and most fundamental of these is stratigraphy, the simple but profound art of reading rock layers. The basic principle is that in an undisturbed sequence, the oldest layers are at the bottom and the youngest are on top. A sudden, thick band of volcanic ash sandwiched between layers of river sediment is not just a layer of dirt, it is a precise time marker, a global timestamp from a specific eruption that froze that moment in the geological record. It tells us exactly when the sky fell, but what if the layers are not horizontal? What if they are tilted, folded, or even ripped apart? This is where paleoseismology enters the investigation. This technique searches for the ghostly fingerprints of ancient earthquakes. When a fault ruptures, it can warp the ground, offset stream channels, and churn up sediments in a distinctive way. By trenching across a fault line and meticulously mapping the deformed layers, a geologist can not only confirm an earthquake happened thousands of years ago, but also estimate its magnitude and how often such violent events recur. It is a history book written in mud and sand. The third tool takes a step back to look at the big picture. Geomorphology is the study of landforms, and to a trained eye, a mountain tells the story of its own destruction. A vast amphitheater-shaped scar on a mountainside, paired with a huge pile of debris at its base, is the unmistakable signature of a catastrophic landslide. The very shape of the land is a permanent record of that single, violent moment. Similarly, the bizarre, channeled landscape of the American Scablands could only be explained by a catastrophic flood of almost unimaginable power. The land itself holds the memory of the event. For a more precise calendar, scientists turn to the quiet chronicle of tree rings, a science known as dendrochronology. Each year, a tree adds a new ring, and the width of that ring is a diary entry of that year's climate. A series of abnormally narrow rings signals years of severe drought or cold, a period of immense stress for the tree and, by extension, for any civilization relying on the land. By overlapping the ring patterns from living trees with those from ancient timbers and even fossilized logs, researchers have built continuous chronologies stretching back thousands of years. This living calendar can pinpoint the exact year a city was buried by a volcano or a prolonged drought began to strangle an empire. No single tool provides the full picture. The true power of the geological autopsy lies in the convergence of evidence. A layer of volcanic ash, dated by its chemical fingerprint, is found in a lake bed core that also shows a dramatic shift in pollen, all while tree rings from that same period record a sharp, global cold snap. When stratigraphy, paleoseismology, geomorphology, and dendrochronology all point to the same moment of collapse, the conclusion is inescapable. We are no longer relying on myth or fragmented historical accounts. We are reading the direct testimony of the Earth. With this forensic toolkit now in hand, we can return to the human stories and re-interrogate the evidence, separating legend from the terrifying reality written in stone. Plato's story of Atlantis is a ghost that haunts history, a tale of a magnificent island civilization that vanished into the sea in a single day and night. For over 2,000 years, it has been dismissed as pure fiction, a philosopher's allegory about hubris and divine punishment. Yet what if this enduring myth holds a geological ghost within its narrative shell? The Minoan eruption of Thura presents a compelling echo. Here was a sophisticated, advanced island culture, a thalassocracy that commanded the seas, suddenly shattered by a volcanic cataclysm and the tsunamis that followed. The central part of their island did not just explode, it collapsed into the sea, forming the caldera we see today. The parallel is haunting. A powerful maritime society, an island, a catastrophic sinking into the waves. Geology does not prove the existence of Plato's fabled metropolis, but it reveals a plausible template. It shows us how a real, historical disaster of such immense scale and terror could be remembered, distorted, and passed down through generations. The specific details of Atlantis, its concentric rings and its Bronze Age splendor, are likely the embellishments of a storyteller, but the core trauma, the loss of a great power to the unforgiving sea, that feels like a genuine memory fossilized within the legend. This is the crucial interplay. By stripping away the mythic layers with our geological tools, we do not just debunk a story, we understand the human mind. When faced with an event too vast to process, we forge it into narrative. The unpredictable violence of the earth becomes the will of an angry god. The collapse of a volcano becomes the punishment for a prideful kingdom. The geological autopsy allows us to listen to that story again, to hear the whisper of a real disaster buried beneath centuries of retelling. It teaches us that our oldest stories are often not just fantasies, but the long shadow of a very real and very terrifying geological past. Our greatest vulnerability is not the mountain itself, but our refusal to listen to its warnings. Geology provides the stage and the hazard, but it is our own choices that so often write the tragedy. We build sprawling cities directly atop active fault lines, drawn to the fertile soils of river valleys that are only fertile because of constant flooding. We clear-cut forests from unstable mountain slopes to make way for farms, removing the very roots that hold the land together. We concentrate millions of people in the shadow of volcanoes, lured by the incredibly rich volcanic soil, forgetting that the source of our bounty is also the source of our potential ruin. This pattern of settling in harm's way is not a modern error, it is a historical constant. Civilizations have always flourished in geologically dynamic areas precisely because the same forces that create the danger also create the opportunity. Earthquakes create fertile valleys, volcanoes create nutrient-rich plains, and rivers that flood deposit life-giving silt. The risk is the price of admission for the reward. A stark example of this fatal attraction occurred in Peru in 1970. Mount Huascarán, a towering peak in the Andes, had a history of colossal landslides. The evidence of past collapses was written plainly on the landscape in the form of a massive, ancient debris field, yet villages were built directly upon this path. When a powerful earthquake shook the mountain loose, it triggered an avalanche of ice, rock, and mud that raced down the mountain at incredible speeds. It followed the exact same channel it had taken centuries before, obliterating the town of Yungay and killing tens of thousands of people. The geological hazard was real, but the scale of the disaster was a product of human settlement on a known, deadly pathway. This is the recurring, painful theme. Our actions, our needs, and our ambitions can amplify a natural process into a full-blown cataclysm. We are not passive victims of the planet's whims, we are active participants in our own fate. And now, a new and pervasive human factor is entering the equation, one that touches every corner of the globe and acts as a threat multiplier for all these geological dangers. Our planet's thermostat is now firmly in human hands, and we are turning up the heat. This global fever is not just melting ice, it is fundamentally altering the geological rules of the game. The slow, natural cycles that govern these mountains for millennia are being accelerated into overdrive. Climate change has become the ultimate modern catalyst, a force that loads the dice for disaster. Take the terrifying phenomenon of glacial lake outburst floods. As glaciers retreat at an unprecedented pace, they leave behind these vast, dammed lakes. The warming climate is creating more of these lakes and filling them faster, putting immense pressure on the unstable moraine dams. It is a recipe for a catastrophic release, turning serene mountain valleys into torrents of destruction with a single, triggering event. The mountains are becoming less stable in other ways too. In high-altitude regions, permafrost has acted as the glue that holds steep slopes together for thousands of years. This perpetually frozen ground is now thawing. As the ice within the soil and rock melts, it loses its structural integrity. The result is a dramatic increase in the frequency and size of landslides and rockfalls. Solid ground is literally turning to slurry, threatening villages and infrastructure built in the shadow of these suddenly unstable peaks. The very weather patterns that deliver water are being twisted. Some regions face more intense, concentrated rainfall, which strips away precious topsoil with devastating efficiency, repeating the slow-motion crisis that weakened Rome. Other areas are plunged into deeper, more prolonged droughts, stressing water resources and agricultural systems to the breaking point, mirroring the pressures that shattered the Bronze Age world. We are, in effect, conducting a single planet-wide experiment, amplifying the power of the very geological processes that have erased cities and toppled empires. The geological autopsy of the future is being written in the mud of these landslides, in the flood scars on valley walls, and in the silent retreat of the ice. This new reality makes the lessons from these ancient collapses not just academic, but urgently, vitally prescient. So, what can we truly learn from civilizations that were swallowed by the earth? The ruins of these lost cities offer a stark curriculum in survival. They teach us that collapse is not always a verdict of total extinction, but sometimes a brutal lesson in resilience. Across the span of history, a clear pattern emerges. The civilizations that shattered under geological pressure were often those locked into rigid, brittle systems. They relied on a single, dominant food crop. Their wealth flowed through one primary trade route. Their political power was concentrated in an unyielding, centralized hierarchy. This lack of flexibility made them exquisitely vulnerable to a single point of failure. When the earthquake severed their trade, or the drought killed their monoculture, or the volcano blocked their sun, the entire societal structure had no backup plan. It fractured, yet other societies demonstrate a different path, one of adaptation and ingenious foresight. Consider the Nabateans who carved their magnificent capital, Petra, from the desert cliffs of Jordan. They did not choose a safe, well-watered valley. They embraced a hyper-arid landscape, a place that should have been uninhabitable. Their survival was not a matter of luck, but of design. They became masters of every single drop of water. They engineered an intricate network of channels, dams, and cisterns that captured seasonal floodwaters from rare desert storms. They funneled this precious resource into hidden reservoirs, ensuring a stable supply through years of drought. They did not fight their environment. They learned its rhythms and built a system that worked in concert with the desert's harsh logic. Their resilience was born from diversification, not just of water, but of their entire economy, which thrived on trade, taxation, and resource management. This contrasts sharply with a top-heavy empire like the Hittites, whose collapse was accelerated by a centralized grain storage system that could not withstand a decades-long drought. The lesson is profound. We cannot simply avoid the world's dynamic landscapes, for they are often the source of our greatest prosperity. The answer lies in building with intelligence, in creating societies that are shock-absorbent. This means decentralizing power grids, diversifying food supplies, and designing cities with multiple, redundant water sources. It means fostering social structures that are flexible enough to reorganize and cooperate in a crisis, rather than shatter under command. The geological autopsy of past collapses ultimately points us toward this single, vital principle. The goal is not to conquer nature, but to learn how to live with its immense, creative, and destructive power. The knowledge we have unearthed from the rubble is no longer just a history lesson. It is a survival manual for our own future, and the final chapter is being written by our choices today. A single tilted column can tell a story of terror. Archaeosysmology deciphers these silent screams from the past, reading the ruins of ancient cities not for their art or treasure, but for the precise scars left by earthquakes. When a powerful seismic wave passes through the ground, it does not destroy randomly. It leaves a distinct signature. A wall may fall in a specific direction, its stones splayed out like a fan, indicating the wave's path. A row of massive columns might all be collapsed in the same orientation, like dominoes pushed over by a single, giant hand. The very foundations of a palace can be found cracked and offset, the two sides no longer aligned, a permanent record of the ground lurching sideways in an instant. This is not speculative history. It is forensic engineering applied across centuries. By carefully excavating these destruction layers and using scientific methods to date the charcoal from subsequent fires or the pottery shattered in the collapse, researchers can pinpoint the exact century, and sometimes even the exact year, a forgotten earthquake struck. This work transforms legend into a data point. The story of a city being destroyed by the wrath of a god becomes a verifiable seismic event, its intensity and epicenter mapped with modern scientific rigor. This long-term timeline is our most powerful tool for assessing risk today. If an archaeosysmologist uncovers evidence that a devastating quake has leveled a city on this spot every 500 years, and the last one was 490 years ago, the message for the modern metropolis built atop the ruins is terrifyingly clear. The past is not just prologue, it is a precise and ticking clock. This field provides the hard, physical evidence that turns our geological autopsy from a theoretical exercise into a stark warning, written in the very stones of our ancestors. A river's delta is a library written in mud. For the great civilizations that grew along the Tigris-Euphrates, the Indus, and the Yellow River, these vast flat plains were not just fertile farmland, they were the foundation of empire. But that same silt which gave life also became a perfect recording medium, a sedimentary archive that chronicles their triumphs and their failures. Scientists extract this history by driving long tubes deep into the ground, pulling up core samples that are like vertical timelines. Within these columns of compacted dirt, they can read the story of a society's relationship with its river. A thick, dark layer rich in charcoal speaks of widespread fire, perhaps from a sacked city or a period of intense warfare. A sudden band of coarse, heavy sediment points to a catastrophic flood, an event so powerful it carried gravel far from the river's normal channel. And then there are the more insidious clues, like the slow, creeping presence of salt crystals. This is the signature of salinization, a death sentence for irrigation-based agriculture. When farmers water their fields in arid regions, the water evaporates, leaving behind dissolved salts. Over generations, without proper drainage to flush these salts away, the soil becomes poison. The wheat withers, the yields plummet, and the land that once fed millions turns barren. This is not the drama of a volcano or an earthquake. It is a slow-moving crisis, a mistake in engineering and management written plainly in the earth. When archaeologists match these sedimentary layers with evidence from the ruins above, the story becomes undeniable. A layer showing severe salinization directly coincides with the abandonment of farmsteads and a contraction of the city. A band of flood debris aligns with a destruction layer in the city walls and a gap in the historical record. The river giveth and the river taketh away. These archives reveal that collapse was rarely a single dramatic event, but a fraying of the bond between the people and their environment. The dirt itself holds the memory of both prosperity and failure, a testament to how the very source of a civilization's strength can, over time, become the instrument of its undoing. From the broad narratives held in mud, we turn to the smallest of silent witnesses, the ancient pollen and spores trapped within it. A civilization's final breath is captured in a microscopic grain of pollen. This is the science of palynology, a field that deciphers the ancient environment from the durable shells of pollen and spores preserved in mud and peat. Every plant species produces pollen with a unique shape, like a tiny, indestructible signature. When researchers extract a core sample from the bottom of a lake that once served a city, they are pulling out a layered botanical diary. Each depth corresponds to a different era, and the changing mix of pollen tells a vivid story of what was growing around the city walls, year by year, century by century. A dramatic decline in the pollen of tall forest trees, followed by a sharp rise in the pollen of weedy grasses and cultivated grains, is a clear signal of widespread deforestation. The people were clearing the land for agriculture and timber, a logical step for a growing society, but this shift in the pollen record reveals the unintended consequences. Without the deep roots of trees to anchor the soil, the land would have become vulnerable to the very erosion that crippled Rome. In other cores, a different story emerges. The gradual disappearance of moisture-loving plants like oaks and their replacement by pollen from drought-resistant shrubs like sagebrush paints a stark picture of a landscape drying out. This is the botanical proof of a climate shift, the same kind of prolonged drought that pushed the sea peoples onto their ships. We can see the crops failing in the pollen record long before the city gates were breached. This microscopic evidence provides an intimate look at the world as the civilization last saw it. We are not just studying their bones and their bricks, we are seeing the very flora that surrounded them, the plants they walked past every day, the agricultural foundation they relied upon. It is the most personal layer of the geological autopsy, a snapshot of their environment in its final, fragile state. When this botanical evidence is combined with the earthquake scars in the ruins, the volcanic ash layers in the soil, and the climate data from the tree rings, the disparate clues lock together. We are no longer looking at separate pieces of a puzzle, but a single, terrifyingly comprehensive picture of a complex society, meeting a perfect storm of geological and environmental pressures. A single clue is a whisper, but a chorus of evidence speaks the truth. This is the power of a multi-proxy reconstruction, the ultimate synthesis of our geological autopsy. We are no longer looking at just the broken bones in the ruins or the scar on the mountainside. We are listening to every witness at once. Think of tree rings telling us a story of relentless drought. Then we look to ice cores drilled from deep within glaciers, where tiny bubbles of ancient air and layers of volcanic ash are frozen in time. The ice core confirms the exact year of a colossal eruption from a volcano on the other side of the world, an event that would have cast a pall over the sun and deepened the drought's misery. Finally, we turn to the archaeological site itself, where a layer of burned debris and shattered pottery lies directly beneath that same volcanic ash fall. The story locks into place. A society was already stressed by years of failing rains, its people hungry and its government straining. Then the sky darkened, the temperatures plummeted, and the final blow fell, perhaps in the form of an invasion or an internal revolt born from desperation. No single piece of evidence could tell this whole story. The tree rings alone only show the drought, the ice core only shows the eruption, the archaeological dig only shows the violence. It is only when we weave them together that we see the perfect storm. This holistic view shatters simplistic narratives. It forces us to abandon the idea that a civilization falls for one single reason, like a foreign invasion or a bad king. Instead, we see a complex web of environmental stress, geological bad luck, and social fragility. A society is a system, and like any system, it can withstand a single shock. But when multiple shocks hit in rapid succession, when the food supply, the climate, and the political order all fail at once, the entire structure can come crashing down. This synthesized view from the past holds up a stark mirror to our present. Our modern global civilization is the most complex system humanity has ever built. We face our own web of interconnected pressures, from climate change acting as a threat multiplier to strained supply chains and political instability. The geological autopsy does not give us a simple yes or no answer about our fate. It gives us something far more valuable, a profound understanding of vulnerability and resilience. The past shows us the patterns of collapse, but it is our choices in the present that will determine which pattern we ultimately follow. Our civilization is woven into a fabric of geological time, a tapestry whose threads are pulled by forces that do not care for our schedules. The evidence from every collapsed society we have examined points to one inescapable conclusion. These are not freak accidents of a bygone era. They are the expected, recurring events on a dynamic planet. The fault lines will slip again, the volcanoes will awaken, the climate will continue to shift. The real question is not if our world will face a geological reckoning, but when the next one will arrive, and which of our densely packed cities will be in its path. In many ways, our modern global system is more fragile than the empires of the past. A single point of failure, like a magnitude 8 earthquake under Tokyo or a major eruption at Yellowstone, would not be a local tragedy. It would trigger a cascade of failures across our intricately linked world. Supply chains for food, medicine, and energy would snap. Financial markets would seize. The very networks that make us strong in times of peace could amplify a disaster into a global crisis. We have built our greatest metropolises on the same fertile ground that ancient cities coveted, ground that is fertile precisely because it lies in river floodplains or in the shadow of volcanoes. Our concentration of people and assets in these zones of high geological productivity is also a concentration of risk. Yet we are not powerless. We possess a gift that the rulers of Helike or the Minoans could never have dreamed of, the power of foresight. We can read the mountain's history in the rock. We can map fault lines with satellite precision. We can monitor the faint tremors and ground swelling that precede a volcanic eruption, giving us days or even weeks to evacuate. We have the scientific knowledge to build earthquake-resistant structures and design early warning systems that can shut down power grids and stop high-speed trains seconds before the shaking starts. This is our crucial advantage, but knowledge is useless without the will to act upon it. The fate of our civilization now hinges on a choice. Will we continue to build recklessly on known fault lines, prioritizing short-term economic gain over long-term survival? Or will we invest in resilience, in strengthening our infrastructure, in enforcing intelligent building codes, and in heeding the evacuation orders when they come? The geological autopsy of past collapses gives us the diagnosis. It is now our responsibility to write the prescription. The knowledge gleaned from these ancient ruins is worthless if it remains locked in textbooks. Our geological autopsy provides a clear prescription for survival, a blueprint for building a resilient future. The first and most tangible defense is engineering. In seismic zones around the world, this means enforcing robust building codes that allow structures to sway with the Earth's motion rather than shatter against it. It means designing foundations that can withstand liquefaction, the same process that doomed Helike. For communities living in the shadow of volcanoes, preparedness is not a suggestion, it is a lifeline. Detailed evacuation routes, practice drills, and continuous monitoring of ground swelling and gas emissions can provide the precious hours needed to escape a pyroclastic flow's path. We must also become master hydrologists, managing our water resources with the wisdom of the Nabateans. This involves sustainable irrigation to prevent the slow poison of salinization that destroyed Mesopotamian fields, and protecting vital forests to anchor the soil against the erosive forces that crippled Rome. Technology offers us eyes where the ancients had none. Satellites now constantly scan the planet, tracking the subtle growth of dangerous glacial lakes and measuring the inflation of a volcano's slopes in millimeters, giving us an early warning system that previous civilizations could only have prayed for. Yet all the engineering and technology in the world are futile without the final, most difficult ingredient: the integration of this scientific understanding into the very heart of urban planning and political decision-making. We must choose to restrict construction on active fault lines, to preserve natural floodplains, and to invest in resilient infrastructure, even when the benefits are not immediately visible. We possess the knowledge to avoid the fate of the Minoans, to sidestep the collapse that befell the Bronze Age. The challenge is no longer one of information, but of will. The past has delivered its testimony. The verdict for our future now rests entirely with us. Our journey through these fallen cities uncovers a fundamental connection. Human ambition is permanently tethered to the planet's deep, restless power. We have seen civilizations erased in an instant by earthquake and fire, and others starved into submission by the slow, silent theft of their soil. The Earth's dynamics are not a backdrop to our history. They are a primary author, scripting triumphs and tragedies with the turn of a tectonic plate or the eruption of a magma chamber. This geological autopsy of collapse is ultimately a lesson in humility. It forces us to acknowledge that our steel and glass empires are temporary structures on a planet that operates on a timescale of millennia. We are tenants here, not masters, yet this understanding is not a counsel of despair. Every layer of ash, every offset foundation, every salted field holds a lesson in survival. These stories of loss offer us a path forward, paved with knowledge and foresight. By listening to the whispers from the stone, we can learn to build with greater wisdom, to respect the boundaries of fault lines and floodplains, and to create societies that are flexible, resilient, and deeply aware of the ground they stand on. Let the silent streets of Pompeii and the drowned temples of Helike stand as permanent reminders of our shared vulnerability, but also as a powerful call to action. Our future will be written in the dialogue between human ingenuity and planetary force. The next chapter is ours to write. We would love to hear which of these geological mysteries captured your imagination the most. Was it the instantaneous freeze frame of Pompeii, the climatic unraveling of the Bronze Age, or the silent, sinking threat of the Maya's cenotes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to continue exploring the forces that shape our world, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the past. The ground still holds its breath, keeping secrets we have only begun to uncover. For every city we have found, like Pompeii or Akrotiri, countless others remain lost, their names forgotten, and their stories silenced beneath layers of debris. What sprawling Minoan port now lies buried under the seafloor near Crete, and what Hittite administrative center is entombed under a landslide in the Turkish highlands? These are not just archaeological curiosities, they are the missing chapters in the story of humanity. Our ability to find them is being transformed by new eyes in the sky. Technologies like LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to see through dense jungle canopy, are revealing the ghostly outlines of entire cities we never knew existed. Suddenly, landscapes we thought were empty wilderness are shown to be carefully managed urban grids hidden for centuries. This is like lifting a veil from the past, and with every scan, we add another potential subject for our geological autopsy. At the same time, our understanding of the future is being sharpened by increasingly sophisticated climate models. These are not crystal balls, but complex simulations that allow us to see how rising global temperatures might intensify monsoon rains, accelerate permafrost thaw, or increase the frequency of drought. They help us answer that critical second question: how will climate change reshape the very geological hazards we have been studying? Will it make certain fault lines more prone to slip, or load mountainous regions with so much rain that landslides become a constant threat? The geological autopsy is far from a closed case. It is a living, breathing discipline. Each new discovery, whether from a satellite sensor or a core sample pulled from a deep lake bed, adds another crucial piece to the puzzle. It refines our understanding of past collapses and, in doing so, sharpens our vision for the future. The mountains are not done telling their stories. They are simply waiting for us to learn how to listen.